How is it that you have not gone extinct yet, Slowpoke? Could Takar's knife really be an effective weapon? Greetings, Pokemon pupils. I am Professor Sequoia, and I specialize in the evolutionary history of Pokemon and how they have adapted to their environments. Now, many of you have now visited the newly discovered, as it were, Alola region, which has Kanto variants that are the perfect example of gradual Darwinian evolution. But before I tackle either of those, something has been bothering me for a long, long time. How is it that Slowpoke has not gone extinct yet? What is it about these dopey Pokemon that they are able to survive? As a matter of fact, it seems strange that they've even evolved at all. Get your Pokedexes out. We're going to be doing a little bit of a science lesson. First, let us clear the air. You might recall from some older Pokedexes that Slowpoke is incredibly slow and dopey. This is still true. But it is said that it takes this Pokemon about 5 seconds to feel pain. And that sounds rather slow. However, that is not quite the case. See, pain signals are actually among the slowest signals in the body. Movement signals from your muscles, like when I move my arm, travel from the brain to the muscle at about 100 meters per second. This is 1/3 of the speed of sound. Touch signals, like when I touch my staff lightly and give it a good feel, are at around 70 meters per second. So, how fast would you wager pain signals take? For example, if I were to slap my hand with a staff, let me do a better one. That's a good one. It hit right along here. How long would it take for the pain signals to travel? How fast do they go? 50 meters per second? 30 meters per second? 10 meters per second? Well, you're all wrong. It actually takes 60 centimeters per second. That is the speed of pain signals. But if that's the case, it should take almost 4 seconds, considering the pain signals have to go to the brain and then come back. And I'm 5'6", so it should take about 4 seconds for me to feel pain, not far behind from a Slowpoke. But that's not quite true. Pain does not travel to your brain. If it had to travel to your brain, it would take too long for pain to be experienced, and thus greater damage to your body would be achieved. Instead, it goes to your spine. Your spine does have a little bit of processing power, just enough to recognize a pain signal and send it back to the point of origin, my fingers, thus allowing me to pull back within reasonable time. And since, let's say, the average pain signal needs to travel about 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet, that means the pain signal is only really 2 seconds. And even then, that's me being on the slower side. Slowbro, taking 5 seconds to experience pain, is not too far off. All it would need to do is experience pain to the brain and then transmit it. There's just one problem. I'm 5 feet 6 inches tall. And according to the Pokédex, Slowpoke's height is 3 feet 11. Personally, I have a problem with this measurement being height, because it is very likely that the Pokédex takes into account the curvature that Slowpoke's tail sometimes takes. This scorpion pose could be 3 feet 11 inches. Or, and the other professors have never made this clear to me, do they mean length? is Slowpoke actually 4 feet long? As in, if I were to lean forward, would I be as long as a Slowpoke? That has not been decided. However, the point still stands. If it were to experience pain at 5 seconds, if it were to go to the brain instead of to the spinal cord, like we have estimated, that would mean that it would have a pain speed roughly the same as a human's. However, if its pain receptors go to the spine and then to the site of the pain, like is widely believed, its pain signals are half as fast as ours, or a mere 30 centimeters per second. It takes twice as long for Slowpoke to feel pain. However, that might not necessarily be the case or even be true, as Professor Rowan's Pokedex notes, although slow, it is skilled at fishing with its tail. It does not feel pain if its tail is bitten. Perhaps it can feel something, like touch, and supposing that its travel speed is half of what ours is, then Slowpoke would feel touch at about 35 meters per second. This would still half its reaction time to ours, but it would still be fast enough to potentially reel in slower moving fish-like Pokemon, for example, a Magikarp or a Feebas. And the fact that it does not feel pain means it might not know what it is reeling in. A particularly slow Bruxish, for example, could be reeled in with catastrophic results. It is well known as well, especially with the Johto Dex, I believe. Yes. According to one of the Johto Pokédex entries, it states that if something bites its tail, it won't even notice for a whole day. If this is true, how does it gain food? A chomp on the tail that does not go notice for a whole day means you've missed hundreds of opportunities for food. Especially considering that Slowpoke secretes a sweet substance likened to sap out of its tail. A very strange event for sure, but that sweet sap could serve an evolutionary purpose. Fish don't tend to taste sweet things, but they can taste something in the water. Potentially this sap, which would taste good to a mammal as in sweet, could taste like a promising food item to swimming fish. When they bite onto the tail and try and get food, the Slowpoke's touch receptors feel it and reel it in. As you can tell, I personally do not believe that something like a Slowpoke would not notice food for a whole day. If its pain receptors are traveling at 35 meters per second, then it wouldn't take very long for it to notice, there's food on my tail, I must pull it out of the water. It would not take an entire day. Some Pokédex entries even claim that it won't even react if it's been bitten, but as we've noticed, it can feel pain. So personally, some of these entries, some of these older entries, are not to be believed. But some of the newer entries with updated science can be trusted. For example, the Unova Pokédex states that, although slow, it is skilled at fishing with its tail. It does not feel pain if its tail is bitten. Just because it feels pain does not mean that it does not feel. And if it feels something grab onto its tail, as a touch signal instead of a pain signal, at 35 meters per second, that signal would travel to Slowpoke's brain, and then it would be able to pull out the fish and feed. This, of course, is a valid explanation as to how Slowpoke gets its food. It sweetens the water, making the water taste like food to the fish bite onto the tail, and then out comes the fish when Slowpoke pulls its tail out, and the Slowpoke gets a meal. However, Slowpoke is known to be vacant-minded. Not vacant-minded enough to not feel pain or not feel anything for a whole day, sure. But sometimes it can be difficult to tell the difference between a sleeping and a waking Slowpoke, as I believe it is one of the older Kanto dexes states. Yes, it says right here, it remains in a daze except when fishing with its tail. Food compels these Pokemon and makes them actually act rather normally. Outside of this, they act rather slow. Slow-witted, that is. So you may be wondering then, what's the risk to the Slowpoke? If they can get food, what's the big deal? Yes, it takes them a longer period of time to feel certain signals, but other than that, they seem okay. Well, first, doesn't it strike you as odd that a Pokemon that is part Psychic type is incredibly slow-witted? That's the first thing worth noting, and that's just something that I personally have noted in my years as a Pokemon professor. However, the bigger threat is not to the Slowpokes themselves or even their environment. It's man. As you may know, Slowpoke tails are considered a delicacy. Hell, I've had Slowpoke tail in Kalos several years ago. It is very, very good. Slowpoke tails, when harvested properly, make for a good delicacy. And I have personally made sure that Slowpoke tails in Kalos have not been harvested illegally. So too with the Slowpoke tail stews in Alola. However, because of how sweet tasting Slowpoke tails are, some are not content to wait for it to be a delicacy. And Team Rocket had a business plan. They had cut the tails off of hundreds of Slowpokes in the wild, not on any of the farms that produce Slowpoke tails, but out in the wild, hundreds of Slowpokes lost their tails. In captivity, Slowpokes grow their tails back. However, Slowpokes in the wild don't often live long enough in order to get their tails back, because they cannot get the food that they need in order to survive. The sap that they use in order to attract fish is also what makes the tails sweet, and also makes Slowpokes a prime target. It reminds many people of shark finning, but in the case of Slowpoke, it is a much slower affair. Because they don't feel pain, they don't notice that they lost their most valuable tools, and it is not likely that they feel much hunger until they starve to death. It is truly saddening, but it is worth noting. If you are going to eat Slowpoke tails, ensure that you get them from a reputable, ethical source. Because, frankly, they're one of my favorite Pokemon. And slow and dull-witted as they are, I just can't help but smile whenever I see a Slowpoke. Thank you for watching this broadcast from my lab. I am Professor Sequoia, and I will be seeing you another time, trainers.